Hi, this is Yaffi Lvova, registered dietitian nutritionist with Baby Bloom Nutrition. Last week you heard from me on tongue and lip tie, and you met my little boy Daniel, and he's currently napping. But I'm ready with my burp cloth and my nursing cover, so should we have a repeat of last week, I am all prepared and won't have to leave you. Last week's video has had over 3,000 views, which is wild. So I'm open to any topics, anything you want to know, because obviously I struck a chord with that one, and hopefully it'll be the same with growth charts. I know they can be really confusing. So a little bit about who I am first. As I said, I own Baby Bloom Nutrition. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist out of Chandler, Arizona, and I do one-on-one and small group counseling for nutrition issues that arise in between pregnancy and toddlerhood. Anything with pregnancy nutrition, breastfeeding, colic and fussiness, choosing the right formula, or if you have an elimination diet for allergies, and food introduction, selective eating. Check out my website at babybloomnutrition.com. I'm also very active on Pinterest at pinterest.com/Yaffi, Yaffi, and Nap Time Nutrition is every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Arizona time, which currently is 3 p.m. Eastern time and Greenwich Mean Time -7. We don't change our clocks because we don't want to mess around with that. So, growth charts. It was brought to my attention that whenever I use a visual aid on Facebook Live, it's backwards. So I drew this backwards just for you. So it looks gorgeous. I know it's not perfect, but it was the best I could do going backwards. So this is a replica of your standard growth chart. So on the bottom, you have age, and usually that's going to be in months, and on the side we have weight. And so there are actually 3 different growth charts that you look at when for children. You're looking at weight versus length, which is, I have age here, but we have length versus age and weight versus age. But they all pretty much look like this. And this is a huge sore point with parents because it can be so confusing interpreting this. And when you hear that your child's at the 2nd percentile or the 98th percentile, what does that really mean? So a growth chart is a way to plot growth over time. There are different sets of growth charts. There's a CDC, and which is the Center for Disease Control, and there's also the WHO, the World Health Organization. And what we use from birth to 2 is always the World Health Organization. The CDC did develop some charts, but we don't use them. And part of that reason is because they weren't ideal. They were created off of limited data. For instance, there was no data from 0 to 3 months, and yet there was a chart that people were using. So it's not perfect. It was based on formula-fed infants, and the World Health Organization charts are based on breastfed infants under ideal circumstances. And what we want when we're looking at growth is a comparison to an ideal circumstance, not something that is limited by culture or feeding type or time frame, which the CDC were. So we don't use those. And if you happen to see at your doctor's office that they are using the CDC growth chart, mention it because they might have grabbed the wrong chart. They might just still be hanging around. The CDC also used very small sample sizes. They just weren't based on good data. So we use World Health Organization for 0 to 2 years. It is indicative of optimal conditions, which is what we want. So what does the growth chart tell us? The growth chart tells us trends in growth over time. So as your child gets older and progresses along this axis, we are expecting them to progress along this axis. And my dark line here is the 50th percentile. But we do have the 2nd, 5th, 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, 90th, 95th, and 98th percentiles on this chart, just so that you can try to hit exactly where your child is. So this, you can't think of this like in school, where you get a 98% and that's a good thing, and you get a 2% and that's like, where were you that day? No, this is completely a different concept. This is a comparison to other kids and averages that are the same age. And this chart, we're looking at age. So it would be comparison to other kids who are at the same age, what their weight is. 50th means average. It doesn't mean failing. Neither does 2% or 98th percent for that matter. What you want to look for is a comparison with yourself, well, as a child. You want your child to be compared to your child, not compared to anyone else. So what you're looking for is if you have a point on the 50th percentile, roundabout birth, let's just say here, you want to see that the child is growing along that curve, thereabouts. And I'll talk about why certain points might be a little bit different. But you want them to maintain their curve. This also holds true for the second percentile. If your child is way down here in the second percentile, you want to make sure that they maintain that curve. That means that they're healthy. When you start having a problem, you should be concerned when your points look more like this. You're not maintaining the curve. That's called dropping off the growth chart. That's a problem. But if you start out at the second percentile and you're still up here at the second percentile, that's totally healthy. That means that your child is growing as expected with the curve that your child has established. There are certain instances where someone might not be on the growth chart. For instance, I have twins. They were born just under 5 pounds at 36 weeks and 4 days. They were not on the growth chart, but now they are because there was catch-up growth. There are also issues when, for instance, if you have someone with Down syndrome, there's a special growth chart that's specifically for Down syndrome because those children grow at a different rate and they shouldn't be compared to the standard growth of another child who doesn't have the same physiology and same biological makeup. So the reason why you might have one measurement here and one measurement here and then back up on the growth chart is because kids don't hold still. I'm waiting a minute so you can laugh because I know you can relate to that. Kids do not hold still. When you try to measure them, they squirm. So it means that when you're measuring their weight or you're measuring their height, it's not going to be perfect. When an adult steps on the scale, they step on the scale and look down and possibly hold their breath, but that's a whole other issue. So you look down and you stay still until your weight is registered, but kids don't do that. Kids squirm around, which means that the measurements are not 100%, which is another reason you want to look at growth overall, over time. You don't want to be concerned about one mark that's off the normal chart. When you should be concerned is when you have multiple instances where your child's growth is not on the curve that they have established themselves. So you want to look at trends versus points. The overall point that I want to get across is you need to compare your child's growth to your child's growth over time. It doesn't matter if they started out at the 50th or they started out at the second, as long as they are maintaining that growth, it's not a concern. Other factors that might affect their growth is stature of the parents, for instance. If you have 2 parents who are very short, you're likely not going to have a kid who is at the 98th percentile for height. It makes sense, but when the doctor gives you this chart and says your child is at the 2nd percentile, you might freak out, but you don't need to. That's my whole point. Environment, the feeding type, there are plenty of reasons why your child might be shorter or a little bit lower in weight or a little bit taller. People are built differently, and as long as your child is maintaining the curve that they've established, you're okay. So as I said, you should be concerned when you fall off of your chart by 2 standard deviations. If you are at the 50th and all of a sudden you go from the 50th to the 25th to the 10th and then maintain the 10th. Uh-oh, you hear Daniel? Maintain that curve on the 10th. That might be a concern. Maybe something happened. Maybe there are some food allergies or some other issue going on. If you're at the 50th and you hit the 10th and then come back up to the 50th, that was likely a faulty measurement. It's not a big deal. That's why doctors shouldn't be concerned with one bad measurement. If there are any questions, please leave some comments. And if you have any suggestions for next week's topic, I am open. And hopefully this struck the same chord as the tongue tie conversation did, because that one was really good for a lot of people. So I eagerly await your comments, and I'll see you next week on Tuesday at 1 p.m. right here at Facebook Live, Baby Blue Nutrition. Thanks.